Chapter 35. The back door swung open, and Jacob and I both turned automatically towards the stairs. "Everything okay, Edward?" thought Carlyle. "Yes," I said. "Bring them up." My family filed into the house and slowly mounted the stairs. Confusion reigned in their thoughts as they came quietly to stand around Jacob and me. Alice's brow was furrowed, her mind far away. She had been looking for Renesmee's future when they were outside, hoping to be able to see something that far from Jacob, but it was still blurry. She caught my eye, her face concerned.
"Daddy! Jacob!"
Renesmee's eyes were luminous, happy. She looked at me, her mind filled with visions of the night stars, the sky, and the constellations she already recalled. I smiled at her, nodding to show that I saw what she was showing me, and then I looked around. "I need to speak to everyone," I said quietly. "Rosalie, could you give Renesmee to Jacob so he can take her downstairs?" Jacob's mouth fell open, and his eyes lit up with anticipation and gratitude. "Oh, thank you, Edward." He turned quickly towards Rose and Renesmee, holding out his arms.
"No, I won't,"
Rosalie snapped. "Yes, you will," I hissed quietly.
"Absolutely not,"
she shot back. Renesmee, who had been looking eagerly towards Jacob, now glanced between our faces, her expression concerned. I breathed deeply and tried to smile, anxious not to upset her. I walked over and gently lifted Renesmee from Rosalie's arms. Rose was furious, but did not resist. I kissed Renesmee's forehead, and then lowered her into Jacob's arms. He held her stiffly for a moment, almost overcome, and then slowly, tenderly, pressed her against his chest, warmth and love glowing in his heart. He looked up at me for a moment, eyes shining with happiness, before turning and hurrying down the stairs. I turned back to my family, who were looking at me with expressions ranging from stunned to disgusted. Jasper was shaking his head, looking at the spot where Jacob had been standing. Was that love? He thought, mystified. Why? I looked carefully around, pausing to take in everyone's eyes, and then started slowly, cautiously. "Do you remember when I told you about the wolves in printing?" There was a beat of confused silence. This was not what anyone had been expecting. Alice's eyes narrowed slightly.
"Do you mean that mating for life thing?"
she asked. "Yes," I said. "But it's more than just that. The first time the wolf sees his imprint, the effect is instantaneous. They are bound for life, irrevocably. She becomes the center of the universe for him, the one thing that holds him to this earth." There was another very pregnant pause. "What the hell are you talking about, Edward?" Jasper thought.
"Oh,"
said Esme, her face brightening suddenly.
"Are you trying to tell us that Jacob has imprinted? That's very nice. I've hated seeing him so broken-hearted over Bella."
Her face was sincere.
"Seriously?"
thought Rosalie.
"You made us march around outside and then dragged us up here for that? Who gives a damn?"
Alice had gone back to worrying about her lack of vision. "So the wolf is finally going to get his own girl?" laughed Emmett. "About time." Jasper and Carlyle were still studying me somberly. Jasper could sense my continued unease, and Carlyle knew me well enough to know something else was wrong. I sighed and tried to keep my voice low. I would have to be more direct. "Do you recall when we discussed how one of the wolf pack had imprinted on a 2-year-old? I paused, searching each of their eyes, almost willing them to understand what I was trying to tell them, because I wasn't sure I could say the words out loud. "Jacob has imprinted on Renesmee, my daughter, your niece, your granddaughter." It took only about 3/4 of a second. "Holy shit!" yelled Emmett. "Are you frickin' kidding me, Edward?" His face was shocked and livid.
"He's downstairs alone with her,"
Alice thought, her eyes wide. Jasper hissed, realizing furiously that this must have been what the earlier encounter downstairs had been about.
Oh!
Esme gasped, horror in her voice as she took a step back.
How could he?
She pressed a hand to her stomach.
I'll kill him,
Rose thought simply, and then whirled towards the stairs. No, Rose, I snapped, grabbing her arm. She pulled away, strong in her fury, but then Carlyle grabbed the other arm. I glanced at him, grateful for his support, but was surprised to see his eyes conflicted, agitated. "Stay here, Rose," he said in a low voice, glancing at her and then back at me. His face was strained. "Edward, are you telling us that Jacob has imprinted on Renesmee?" "Yes," I whispered. There were groans and hisses. Rosalie snarled. Carlyle continued to watch me, his face very still. "Edward," he said quietly, "I understand that we owe Jacob a lot, but I question if this is even tolerable." An intense protective instinct coursed through him, through all of them, as they stared at me. "She's a baby, for Christ's sake!" Emmett shouted angrily. "You have to understand," I said quickly. "This is not a romantic thing. I explained that when we discussed the imprinting on the 2-year-old. Rosalie gaped at me.
Did you think any of us were really listening? Like we gave a damn. It's a hell of a lot different when it's our own baby. Not romantic?
Esme asked, her voice panicked and confused.
But I thought Bella said the wolves who imprint will eventually get married.
That can happen, I said, gritting my teeth.
This is downright disgusting, seethed Rosalie. I won't have him near her, thinking God knows what disgusting things. I can't believe he dared to choose her.
Stop it, Rose, I said in a low voice. The imprinting is a compulsion. Jacob had no choice in the matter. The age of the object of the imprint does not matter. The love he feels for her is much like the love any of us feels for her. It is platonic. He just wants her to be safe and happy.
Fine,
snarled Rose.
We promised to keep her safe and happy. Now he can get the hell away from her. Edward,
breathed Alice, her eyes wide.
How can this be okay? Bella would not like this.
I felt a flash of panic that maybe I was doing the wrong thing, allowing Jacob to stay, supporting him, defending him. I looked pleadingly at Carlyle. He took a deep breath. I'm trying to understand this, Edward. Help me understand. I nodded. I know this is a lot harder for all of you than it is for me, because I can see into Jacob's mind. I can see his utter devotion to Renesmee, his desire for her to be happy and given everything she ever wants in life. The love he has for her is simple, pure, and permanent. Downstairs, Jacob was listening, barely breathing, shocked I would speak up so reverently in his defense. Well, wait till Bella wakes up. All bets are off then. However angry or disgusted it makes us feel, it will never change. I looked around, imparting the most telling and probably worst bit of truth. And Renesmee is drawn to him, too. There was a moment of stunned silence. Oh, Christ, Emmett muttered. Rosalie's hands curled into tight fists. The others wrinkled up their faces in surprise. You're sure, Edward? Carlyle said, breaking the quiet. That the feelings he has for her are safe and in control? Yes, I said quickly. I would never allow any harm to come to Renesmee. I can see into his thoughts, and if things change, his expulsion from our house and her life will be swift. I would never allow her to be in any danger or in an inappropriate situation. I said this as much for Jacob's benefit as for theirs. Jasper took a small step toward me, his face tight. This is insanity, Edward. You must know that. I sighed. I don't expect everyone to accept this right away. God knows I don't. However, as long as it is safe for Renesmee, and until Bella wakes up and we are able to discuss this together, I have told Jacob he can stay. There were a couple of groans, and Rosalie's expression bore into mine, her eyes on fire.
No,
she thought, fuming.
I won't allow it.
She's my daughter, I said softly. I saw a small flash of pain in her mind at this. I held her gaze until she looked away, acknowledging my words. That's right, murmured Carlyle. He was looking down pensively, his finger on his chin. Then he glanced up at me. And I'm sorry I ever questioned you. Edward is Renesmee's father, he said out loud. I respect your decision on this. Jacob is a good person, and if he loves Renesmee as we do, then I am glad he is here.
Of course,
said Esme in a small voice, wringing her hands nervously in front of her. She tried to look enthusiastic.
We'd love to have Jacob stay. It's always good to have an extra set of hands with an infant.
She smiled at me. Jasper reached out for Alice's hand. His face was hard, but he nodded. Alice's eyes were far away, seeing nothing. They cleared, and she glared at me.
How will I ever see anything with him here?
Emmett let out a hard laugh. Oh boy, wait till Bella wakes up and finds out, he chuckled. Any takers on how long until she tears him limb from limb?
Emmett,
said Esme reprovingly. There was movement at the bottom of the stairs. Jacob was slowly coming back up towards us, and I felt a flash of annoyance that he would return so quickly. There was an edge of anxiety to his thoughts. He was, very oddly, thinking about me, imagining some strange angle of my face. With a jolt, I realized he could see a bit of Bella lying on the bed in the office, and he was listening to me hum the lullaby I had sung to Renesmee. Confusion and anger flared within me. How could he possibly know that? What was he playing at? Jacob slowly came to the top of the stairs and turned to look at us. His eyes were wide and shocked. Renesmee was in his arms, her deep eyes fixed onto his face. He was holding her small hand against his cheek. "Edward," he whispered, his voice full of wonder. He took Renesmee's hand gently from his face, and my face disappeared completely from his mind. "Watch," he murmured. He placed her hand gently against his cheek again. Immediately, his mind was filled with something different, a vision of Bella. Her face was large and close, sweat and blood pouring down her skin, her eyes half crazed, bloodshot. Jacob choked slightly at the impact of the memory.
Renesmee,
the vision of Bella whispered.
So beautiful.
I absolutely froze in amazement and shock. This was not a memory of Jacob's. This was Renesmee's memory. She had put it into Jacob's mind. Jacob gently removed her hand from his face, and the image vanished immediately from his mind, but not from hers. It was her touch, I realized suddenly, that was the conduit for her thoughts. "What's going on?" grumbled Emmett. My family was growing irritated and confused by this inexplicable exchange between Jacob and me. I perused their faces, and then finally put my hand on Carlyle and pulled him gently toward Jacob. Carlyle was confused, but moved obligingly until he was practically pressed up against Jacob. Jacob shifted uncomfortably, but Carlyle remained calm. I nodded at Jacob. Very gently, he lifted Renesmee's hand. "Let her touch you," I murmured to Carlyle. He bent over slowly, and Jacob pressed Renesmee's hand to his face. Carlyle drew in a sharp breath, as his mind filled with an image of Rosalie. Her face was smiling, close, and she murmured gentle words.
Sweet baby, sweet Renesmee.
Carlyle's stunned eyes shot to mine, and we stared at each other for a long moment. Understanding swept through his face. "She's special," he said softly. "Special like her father." "And her mother," I breathed.
What is it?
asked Alice, her voice desperate.
Is everything okay, Edward?
Carlyle looked at her. "She is..." He paused, thinking of how best to explain. She is passing her thoughts into my mind. She can show you her thoughts.
What?
Gasped Esme in shock. Alice, Jasper, and Emmett exchanged incredulous glances.
What is she thinking about?
Asked Rosalie, moving a step forward. Carlyle looked into Rose's eyes. She's thinking about you. Rosalie's eyes widened and glowed brilliant. She shifted her gaze to Renesmee's small, solemn face. Renesmee returned her gaze steadily, and then the vision changed. Rosalie's face again, not as close, and there was something else in the view. Glinting silver, the metal bottle. Renesmee thought about the contents of the bottle sliding into her mouth, cooling her throat. I felt my own flash of thirst. She's thinking about Rosalie feeding her, said Carlyle quietly. He swallowed hard and stood up slowly, placing Renesmee's hand back into her blanket. My God, I breathed, as the meaning of the vision slowly dawned on me. Not just a memory, a purposeful message within a thought. She's telling you that she is thirsty. There is intent to these thoughts. I think she is communicating with us. Yes, said Jasper suddenly. He moved a step forward, fascination brimming on his face. Yes, she is feeling thirsty. Jacob gently touched her cheek, stroking it lightly. Are you hungry, Nessie? He murmured, gazing down at her. My family stiffened, and an immediate undercurrent of tension ran through their thoughts as they watched Jacob touch her so casually. Rosalie began to practically shake with furious rage, and I shifted slightly closer to Jacob in concern. Renesmee looked up at Jacob, her eyes blinking a couple of times. Then she slowly turned her head towards his hand, opened her mouth, and bit him. There was a moment of surprised silence. Renesmee hung onto Jacob's hand for a second. Then her face crinkled up in something resembling disgust, and she released him. He lifted his hand, staring at it dumbstruck. Ouch, he complained. Renesmee stared at him for a moment, and then her gaze slowly traveled around to all the faces trained on her, and then back to Jacob. Then she smiled widely, white teeth shining. Suddenly, Emmett broke the silence. First he snorted, and then tried to disguise a chuckle as a laugh, and then suddenly he threw his head back and burst out laughing. It grew louder and louder, filling the hallway, as he slapped his leg and hung on to the wall for support. Ouch, he choked out between howls of laughter. Ouch! Alice started to smile as well, burying her face into Jasper's chest. He patted her head, smiling, shoulders shaking with amusement. Esme disguised her smile behind her hand, and Carlyle joined in the laughter, patting Jacob on the shoulder. Rosalie bit her lip and rolled her eyes. Jacob looked around at everyone, hand still held out in front of him, eyes wide with shock. Then his face relaxed and broke into a grin. He shook his head and stuck his hand into his mouth, sucking off some of the dripping blood from the quickly healing wound. Jasper took a step forward. Well, I guess she's not venomous, he said lightly, laughter still in his voice. Carlyle's eyes widened slightly. Why don't you let me take a look at that, Jacob? He said, but Jacob shook his head, pulling his hand from his mouth. I'm fine, he said reassuringly. He looked down at Renesmee, smoothing her curls. Don't worry, Nessie, I'm fine.
Nessie?
Said Alice. She was leaning against Jasper.
What is that about?
Jacob shrugged. Nickname, he said. Renesmee is a bit much, don't you think? He glanced at me with worried eyes, but I just smiled. And then Renesmee made a very small movement, and all eyes turned to her. Slowly, as we all watched breathlessly, Renesmee lifted her small arm on her own accord and very deliberately placed it against Jacob's face. Amazing, thought Carlyle. A vision of Jasper holding her bottle blossomed in Jacob's mind. "Oh," said Jacob, glancing around. "Jasper feeding her." Surprise flashed over Jasper's expression. A pleased note entered his mind that she had thought of him. Rose smiled down at the baby.
"I better take this little monkey to get something to drink before she takes another bite. Not that I want to discourage that, of course,"
she thought. Rosalie approached Jacob, her body stiff, not meeting his eyes, but she walked right up to him and carefully took Renesmee. Jacob and Rosalie both flinched as their arms met, but kept their faces impassive. Rosalie brought Renesmee over to me. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I'll see you in a bit, sweetheart," I whispered. She smiled, and her mind filled with the vision of us by Bella's bedside, the lullaby falling from my lips. I smiled gently back down at her. "Yes, I'll sing to you again." Rose turned and headed down the stairs, Esme right behind her. Carlyle hurried after them, wanting to suggest they try the baby formula.
"Where the hell is he? I can't believe I have to come back again to this vile vampire hole. I am not going inside this time."
Leah. She was approaching the house. She and Seth were concerned that they had not heard from Jacob yet. Seth was still several miles out, worried that she insisted on coming herself.
"I'll be so glad when this whole damn thing is over, and then Jacob will want to leave, and we'll never have to see this house or those bloodsuckers again."
I looked down at the floor for a second, pressing my lips together, trying to control my amusement at what Jacob had coming for him when he had to explain what had happened with Renesmee to Leah, and he thought my family would be the biggest hurdle. I took a breath, looking up. "Oh, Jacob," I said quietly. He paused a couple of stairs down and turned around, looking up at me. I smiled. "Leah is coming." He stared at me blankly for a couple of seconds, and then his face turned pale. "Oh, shit."